So, we have done it. We have made it to the last panel of this conference. I'm very happy to say that it was the Riga Conference 2024 at which all the pressing problems were solved. The technological, economic, military dilemmas, everything is crystal clear. No need for further such events in the future. I do hope that this final panel will be an opportunity to energize us a bit and leave us with a sense of urgency in the coming days and as we go back to work. A panel on allied near-term readiness. Hopefully we again go a bit beyond just admiring the problem, admiring our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, and take the conversation a bit further into the practical realm. We have some distinguished speakers bringing some, hopefully, spicy insights from the recent NATO ministerial. So we'll be really looking forward to hearing about that. Christine Berziņa, I pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I don't think we're quite done in terms of solving all the problems, but hopefully right now we get a few more points on how we get there. Our task right now to wrap everything up is to talk about the need for urgent measures and about readiness and preparedness. There's politics and there's nuts and bolts, and who is going to provide them at NATO or perhaps with the EU. That is really important to work out and to get to work. Where I sit in Washington, it does feel like there's a ticking time clock on world's challenges. I think getting to the solutions will be incredibly important. To get to this conversation, we have four incredible panelists. I'm going to start on the far side. Our hosts, Minister Andris Prūts, Minister of Defense of Latvia. Next to him is someone who knows all about the nuts and bolts, Stephen Covington. Stephen is the Strategic and International Affairs Advisor to the Supreme Allied Commander to SACEUR at NATO in Belgium. Next, we have Siebtje Müller, Parliamentary Secretary at the German Federal Ministry of Defense. And last is Benjamin Haddad, French Minister for European Affairs. Thank you all so much. With the host's prerogative, though, and from where we sit, I'd love to start with you, Minister. What has NATO done in the last few years, and what does NATO still need to do to make sure that we sitting here in Riga Castle feel just as safe as anyone sitting in London, in Paris, in Berlin? So much progress has been made at NATO, so many things recently at the Washington Summit in Vilnius, but we're staring down Hague already next summer. What more should we do, and how quickly do we need to do it?
Christine, many thanks, and of course it's a great pleasure and honor to be part of the concluding panel and discussing those issues which I understood already have been solved, as Thomas said. So I should have participated not in ministerial meeting, but here for those last 2 days. So I missed the whole solutions. But anyhow, of course, it's a great opportunity also to see that Riga Conference is evolving all the time and developing and expanding and finding the new emphasis, also the new buildings and sort of new discussions. And this is the same thing to some extent about the NATO. Security, building security, it is an ongoing process. It will never stop. It will continue permanently. Of course, many things have been done. Glass is rather half full than half empty. What has been done? It is important the change of the mindset. Zeitenwende in Germany, but I would say all around NATO allies, we very clearly see what is the core of our task. It is defend and deter against aggressor countries. It is to strengthen our defenses. It is to support, of course, Ukraine. It is clearly to define what is our threat. Madrid, the NATO Summit clearly said it. In strategy, in strategic concept, Russia is a threat. And I think this is a very important starting point. We clearly identify what are the threats we are facing. And of course, then we start with our already specific plans, how we move forward. Regional plans, I think the great thing, that specifically how we ensure security and defense of member states. And once more, I have to underline, there are no several NATOs. There is one NATO, one for all for one NATO. threat to one country is threat to all countries involved. And I think there is, this full understanding of this the premise. Then, of course, we see also practical things, what we've done. And here Latvia is an excellent example. Thousands of allied troops, soldiers on the ground, a multinational brigade already in a sort of the stage when it's being brigade-size exercises, when we see that we are clearly moving according to the roadmap, bringing the soldiers, showing solidarity and unity, bringing, of course, also all assets which are important. So these are the very positive signs and signs of the success story. At the same time, as I started, many things to do. Recent, very serious incident on Latvian soil when Russian Shahed drone violated Latvian, and I would underline, NATO airspace across the NATO air border. So, of course, once more underlines that we live in also a new reality in terms of the technological threats and risks. We live in reality where the hybrid and military direct threats are intermingled, so that we, of course, have to also provide with implementation of those commitments, those agreements we agreed upon, for instance, on a rotational model. So there are things to do, also adjusting, readjusting, addressing those new threats, risks, what we are all facing. Because at the very end, it is about security and safety of our people, and it is about credibility of NATO. So the building credibility and strengthening security and defense of our people, it's an everyday task.
Thank you so much for showing us a bit of that transformation. And you already mentioned the Zeitenwende. So, Zivtik, could you talk a bit about what is going on in Germany? We've heard a lot about the Zeitenwende, and yet there is a desire for that to be spelled out in practice. What does that mean in capabilities, and how is that going?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for inviting us also to this very nice and well-organized conference, and being again as Germany here in Latvia. It's always a pleasure, and thank you very much, first of all. And then if I might share the German perspective on Zeitenwende, or on the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. For us, it's more or less a wake-up call. It's a complete change of the security environment, and which is why we and the Ministry of Defense, we changed more or less everything. We have on the strategic level, we changed the strategic documents, and following that, we changed the structure, reorganized, and maybe ordered a bit in a better way the Bundeswehr, meaning that we have now, for example, an operative command, no longer two commands, that one is for international crisis management and the other is for territorial defense. So we have it now, we restructured the Bundeswehr with the full perspective on collective defense, no longer international crisis management. Then, of course, if you follow this, then you need to think about capabilities, you need to think about personnel, you need to invest more money, which is why we have the special fund. Everybody knows about it, but of course this in numbers is, when I started in the German Bundestag, we spent around about 37 billion euros for the Bundeswehr, and now we are at 75 billion euros. So this is, we doubled what we invest in defense. So this is numbers, and of course we think about how to attract more people to the Bundeswehr. So we started with our proposal to the government, and later on to the Bundeswehr for conscription service. So we are heavily investing, not only strategically with ideas and restructuring the Bundeswehr, but also with concrete proposals and investment in capabilities. We're spending 2% investment, or we spend 2% to invest in security. This is really something for Germany. And then, of course, we invest also, or we stand to the promise, collective defense. There's only one NATO, which is absolutely clear, crystal clear for us as well. The security of our friends and allies, especially at the eastern flank, is our security. So we are with the brigade, we're going to Lithuania. We are here in Latvia with the air policing. We are also, on Monday, we are inaugurating the headquarters for the Baltic. So in the maritime dimension, Germany is overtaking responsibility as well. And then we are granting the military mobility. So we're doing really a lot, doing this restructuring, the investment, and of course fulfilling the promise of collective defense in NATO with overtaking responsibility.
Thank you so much. And as we sit here in Riga Castle and we think about the airspace over our heads, if something is up, it's going to have to be the German Eurofighters that scramble to make sure that we are fine right here. And I think that's just one amazing example about how NATO actually works. Benjamin, Minister, the French have always been very ambitious about Europe and Europe's role. How are you seeing the transformation of the last 2 years, the defense plans, the role that Europe must play for its own security? What does it look like from Paris? Who are the actors who should be involved?
First, thanks for having me, and it's a great pleasure to be here in Riga. We had a great meeting with Foreign Minister Braga yesterday. I'm speaking under the authority of my Professor Marie Mandras, who's also been a very strong voice in the region, so I'm glad. And maybe the reason I'm introducing this way is also to share how important it is for us to be more engaged, re-engage in Central and Eastern Europe. And as the President Macron said in Bratislava last year, as you know, for too long there's been a sense that maybe we should have listened more to the threat assessment, to the perspective of the region on the Russian threat. And what it was telling for the security of all of Europe. And in this respect, and I really want to echo what was just said about Germany, I think we've seen a major awakening all across Europe in the last 2 years over the necessity to, first, to support Ukraine, because Ukrainians are fighting for their sovereignty and freedom, but they're fighting for our security, our interest in the stability of Europe. And so this is why, and I say this a few days after President Zelensky discussed his victory plan with allies, we need to continue to support. We need to step up our efforts, close the 50 billion euro loan, for example, funded on the frozen assets of the Russian Central Bank in Europe, and I hope this will go mostly to the military needs that Ukrainians need. And we need to step up our ambitions at the European level alongside our American allies within the European pillar of NATO. In France, if you take the 2 terms of the Macron presidency, we'll have doubled our defense spending, our defense budget. This needs to continue in the long run. But the only way to make this really effective is to do it at the European level, by bolstering our cooperations, by supporting our European defense industry alongside the United States, and make ourselves more resilient even to what happens in the US. I mean, we're speaking 3 weeks before a US election, but the truth is, whoever is elected in the White House, and I've spent 7 years in the United States, I've seen Republican and Democratic administrations, we'll see a priority that's given to Asia. We'll see a legitimate demand for Europeans to step up and take ownership of their own security and defense. And we'll probably see a trend towards protectionism, as we've seen under the Trump and Biden administration. And the only response to this, once again, is to continue to converge on supporting our security needs, and telling our American friends that they have valuable allies in the Europeans who can really take ownership of their security. In this respect, I think we've made good progress, but there's still a lot to be done. And once again, in supporting Ukraine and in investing at the European level, we have a defense commission now at the European Union, and there's going to be a strategic effort in the first 100 days to write a white paper. I think we want to take a big part of this, and I know we have good partners here to shape that thinking. That will be really critical.
And so now the French ambition for European defense, for European strength, it applies here fully? Because I think that's been a question. I get that sense. Can you confirm it from Paris?
Absolutely.
And the thinking?
I mean, look, first, as you know, France is very committed within NATO, and we're fully involved in the reassurance in the region. We're lead nation in Romania. We have troops in Poland and the Baltic states. We want to continue to do so. I mean, this is, once again, critical to our security. And I would say it's not only about supporting the security of our partners, it's our own security. Russia has been interfering in our democratic process, has been launching cyber attacks, is pushing against our interest in France, but also elsewhere. We've seen Wagner troops, Wagner militias go after our own security and interest, plant fake massacres, blaming it on French troops that we had to debunk. So we've seen the malign influence, malign operations. And so, of course, this is really critical to us and we'll continue to do so. I think the partnership that we have in the region is critical to our security. And if I can add, if you look at some of the conclusions of the Draghi report, who really underline the decline in productivity and competitiveness of the European Union, especially compared to our major partners across the world, in the United States especially, in terms of innovation, AI, quantum, a big part of this will be to invest in our defense industry and how it trickles down afterwards, especially in terms of innovation. And that's something that must be absolutely key for the next European Commission. How do we integrate our capital markets? How do we mobilize private and public saving? How do we invest more in our industry and innovation in general, and especially in defense? That's something that we'll be looking at very closely.
So European defense and European prosperity are going hand in hand.
Absolutely, 100%. Competitiveness, prosperity, and defense. It's really about our security. It's about the survival and the existence of our continent in the long run. You know, can we take ownership of our security, of our defense, or of our economic interest, and do it alongside our allies?
Well, I think that sounds like a good idea. But so we see political will, and Steve, you're in the part that needs to make things happen, in the nuts and bolts of the tanks and the visions that guide that approach. How do you take this political will, and at the NATO level, at the secures level, what are the policies to make sure that readiness happens, that already today, tomorrow, we're as safe as we need to be?
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, for the kind invitation to have the opportunity to share a few ideas. Perhaps the best contribution I can make to this distinguished panel is to lay out some of the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are really important because they differ from the practices of the recent past. And it's really important to understand the different approach we are taking now. NATO is in a new era of collective defense. We are rebuilding and modernizing our collective defense together. We are united by a strategy. The strategy mandates the defense of every inch of alliance territory. No ally left alone to deal with today's threats. It's a modern military strategy. It's not a crisis response strategic framework. It's a strategy designed to guide allies for years in the preparation and strengthening of their deterrence and defense. We are united by it. We have common objectives. And because we have those common objectives stated in the strategy, and this strategy, of course, is nested in our strategic concept, we are able to organize ourselves, not just tactically, not just for one event or one scenario, not just operationally, but strategically. We're able to organize deterrence and defense for almost 1 billion people, 32 countries, and 15% of the globe. That is the size of the area of responsibility that we're defending. And we're defending all of it together. The North supports the South. The West supports the East. We are doing it with integration of new domains across all warfighting disciplines. And because we have this strategy in place, and it was approved by heads of state and government, we are able to implement it. And its implementation is brought about in the form of a family of plans. The plans are set. They are approved. We train to them. We are improving our military system by enhancing our command and control, our logistics, every aspect of our mobility is being enhanced. We are connecting under these plans the nationwide defense of one ally to the nationwide defense of another ally. A very significant change in fundamentals. And that's called DDA implementation, and I won't bore you with any more details. But we're also executing it. The strategy is being used to, right now, shield allies and prevent the escalation and expansion of the conflict ongoing against Ukraine. So we are in a new era. And I use that term to mean long-term period of time. It is guiding us, we are getting stronger, and we are united.
Plans are excellent. Plans need to be resourced. That is, I think, a sticking point, especially here, and a sticking point in the capitals and across the countries, because resourced means both capabilities and also people. Zibda, you talked about this, the recruitment question. Could you talk more about how Germany is thinking about getting capabilities, not just in military production, but in getting a population to understand that service is essential in the world today?
Yeah, it's a complicated question that you ask, and if I'm not known for speaking then too romantic about it. It's really complicated because we in Germany, we thought now for 30 years that everything is very peaceful around us and that we can live in peace with our neighbors. I know, I'm well aware that especially for the Baltic countries and Poland, it was always differently, or since at least latest from 2014 on, it was differently perceived. But for us, we lived in peace times, and so we paid the peace dividend. During those times, there has been abandoned mandatory conscription service, so it seemed that peace has been achieved and nobody had to take care of security unless those who are very willing to do it with the free willing conscription service. So this is something that we now have to discuss with the public. Because before, for a very long time, we told them, well, there's the state, there's somebody anonymous, take care of security, you don't have to bother yourself with it. Then, of course, you now have to shape the discourse again to convince people that the state and the values and peace and security and the freedom that we live in is something that is valuable and that is also necessary, and that is necessary to defend and to be able to defend it. So it has to be the will of the people themselves to also to execute it in the end. We are not there yet, but of course we start the discussion process with the public. Even though Ukraine is quite far away for most of the people, of course we as the government, we have to talk to them and get in touch to convince them that it's necessary to rethink the security environment. The Minister Boris Pistorius proposed a conscription service, like a selection of the best, so that we start again with the conscription service in peacetime. We still have it in a law, in a constitutional law, during crisis, during tension and wartime. But to start again with the administrative process behind it, we needed to have it in action also during peacetime. So we would start with it. We need to get in touch further with the public, but it's not an easy question, especially in a country that has been divided, and there is a part of it that still have very also emotional ties to Russia, and it's nothing to blame to be blamed of the people, because if they were taught for generations that's your brother state, and maybe they have also family ties. Of course, you have to reshape this approach to Russia, and that means a lot of engagement to convince people that, well, the security situation changed completely, and we have to act it and to be able to defend what is valuable in Germany. For us as the government, it's completely clear. I said it in the beginning to your first question. We know the security situation is different. Russia to gain and to establish their national interest, and knowing that there's more or less every day there's a threat against especially the Baltic countries from the Russian side that says that we have to take it seriously. So this for us is clear, but it takes a bit of time.
Yes, Minister Spruts, similar questions in Latvia, but more forward-leaning solutions.
We are building a efficient, credible, modernized NATO. We are all together building NATO which is ready to respond to all kinds of challenges. We are also learning from Ukrainian brothers and sisters, so from their experience, what are the battlefield, which direction it moves. So of course, we must be ready for today's challenges and tomorrow's challenges. But we can learn also some few things from the past. From Cold War years, the strategic awareness, political leadership, and also financial investment. So we need to invest in modernized NATO. We've done a lot. Again, 10 years ago, 3 countries reached 2% of GDP for military expenditure. Now it's 23 countries. Is it enough? Most likely not. If you want to build efficient NATO, it requires financial resources. It requires, of course, political leadership also to convince societies. It, of course, requires also strategic awareness, what kind of threats we are facing and will be facing. We are on a good road, but even 2% already is not enough. So we must speak about 2.5, potentially 3%. There are countries which are already reaching 3%, including Latvia, this year 3.2%, next year 3.5%. But it seems that if we are strategically aware what we are facing, it is still just the beginning in a sense. Of course, investment into our military capabilities correlates with industrial capabilities. And here again, I fully agree that NATO and EU can work hand in hand. NATO defines necessity for those capabilities. EU has a chance also to invest, to create common programs, to develop, let us say, industrial base as well. Even though, of course, there is a debate also among allies, we must remember there are 32 allies. And we are very grateful for Sweden and Finland, of course, joining. I think it strengthens the whole alliance and also attests to the efficiency of alliance. At the same time, if we look at the EU, there are 23 countries which are part of the NATO. So, of course, it is also quite a skillful and efficient model where Europe develops its pillar of military industrial base, but is also including integrating our partners as well, which are not part of the EU, but of course are part of the NATO. So the investment is not just about pure investment, it's about smart policies and developing industrial base, specifically targeting those priority capability areas which we all need to develop. Then people, at the very end, it's about people. It's about people in terms of societies who believe and trust in NATO, who believe and trust in our armed forces, but also, of course, are willing to contribute directly to comprehensive defense. In Latvia, we reintroduced conscription service. We move forward with numbers as well. At the very end, of course, numbers are very much interconnected with quality. And quality which is both on national level and also international level. And here, I guess, we have a lot of positive signs, but still it's an ongoing process. So how we involve our societies, how we motivate our people, how we really make comprehensive defense nationally, but also among our allies.
I like the leadership. I like the fact that responsibility rests with those who will benefit the most, right? Which is our people and our societies. In France, there's a growing awareness of vulnerability with the Russia threat reaching everywhere. What will the French people provide? How do you see the French role in the industrial, in the NATO, in filling out those plans that are so necessary? And how do you convince a young French woman, a young French man, that this is worth their time, their energy, their intellectual labor as well?
It's a great question. I will say first, I've been so encouraged over the last 2.5 years at the level of support and solidarity I've seen in France for Ukraine. because we speak so much of fatigue and lack of focus. But I have to say, after February 24th, the Russian full-scale aggression against Ukraine, I was very concerned that it would be on TV for a couple months, we'd send weapons, and to be fair, at the time we weren't even sending weapons. Then very quickly we would go back to 2008, 2014, and go back to so-called normal and put the dust under the rug. It hasn't been the case. If you look at the polling in France, maybe it's not as strong as it was in early 22, but still, you have a strong majority of support for military support, economic support, humanitarian support, Ukraine's accession within the EU and NATO. And that says something about understanding the threat, understanding the challenge. I was the chair of the France-Ukraine Friendship Group at the National Assembly over the last 2 years, and all across the country, the level of solidarity when it comes to sending humanitarian aid, welcoming refugees, promoting Ukrainian culture across the country has been really remarkable. So that's something important, and it follows when you look at the defense spending. I was mentioning the increase in defense spending, but right now we're going through Parliament with a very important and responsible budget to tackle deficits. It's aimed at reducing deficit by 16 billion euros and mostly cutting spending, which is too high in our country, but we're saving the defense budget. So we're sanctuarizing the defense budget so that we can continue on this track that I mentioned earlier of doubling our defense budget over the 2 terms of the Macron presidency. And it's very important because the truth is the defense budget is your life insurance, but it's not necessarily something which benefits you see in your daily life, right? So it really needs to be communicated and understood why it's so strategic for a country, for security, and I would say for shaping our security all across Europe. Now, when it comes to defense industrial base, I won't fully agree with what you said. I mean, we have NATO priorities, NATO standards. We've, I think, clearly underscored the needs in terms of capabilities and shortages. And then the question becomes, how can we increase our capabilities at the European level? And here, and I know the devil's always in the detail, and these are the conversations that we've been having for the last couple of years, I do think here we need to also support our own industry. And I would say this as a former think tanker who's converted into electoral politics. If you want to keep that public support, if you want to keep the long-term commitment, even at a time where you're making budgetary choices elsewhere, you need to show to your public opinions that it trickled down in terms of jobs, in terms of opening factories, in terms of investments for the country. I mean, that's absolutely critical. And this is where, you know, as we'll be headed towards these debates on European funding at the Commission level, on borrowing, maybe as the former Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, who I'm delighted will play a key role in the next European Commission. She had proposed borrowing 100 billion euros at the European level to invest in our defense, both in our defense capabilities and in supporting Ukraine. I think that needs to come first and foremost at supporting our industry, because that's the only way to be resilient and build the public support in the long run for this.
Having the European defense come from European hands and showing the citizens that they themselves are responsible, I think could be incredibly powerful and also controversial. Because once we get back to NATO, when we get to the Transatlantic and to the burden sharing, it has to be both sides. And it's a complicated and tricky process to make sure the balance of North America and Europe to be right. As you are thinking about the Russian threat at NATO, how are you balancing the transatlantic? How are you including the transatlantic in the stages of this process? And how is the European, or is the European piece of this growing as you're filling out those plans?
Well, before we talk about the NATO process, which might put everybody to sleep, maybe just a comment on the Russian threat. Putin's policies are very different, and they're the driver behind the change in the security environment and the alliance's responses. It's a policy designed to destabilize, designed to exploit crises, It's a policy that seeks advantage. It's a policy that doesn't really find great utility in mutual security and stability. And it is a policy that, in the seeking of advantage, tries to translate that advantage into power for grand strategic objectives, which is breaking the Euro-Atlantic and global security system and turning it into something different than what we've had over the last 80 years. So this is a significant line of movement, and it's being pursued where war, as my colleague has said, is an acceptable instrument to translate that advantage into power. These are fundamentals that have to be addressed by all nations and the alliance and all organizations, and they are. The tactics and strategy, in a grand sense, are the tactics and strategy of revolution. Taking and dismantling something under pressure and intimidation, under the actions of war. So it's a constant demand signal being put on all allies for building, rebuilding, and modernizing our collective defense so that they cannot turn advantage into disadvantage for us. The NATO process is long established for modernizing our capabilities and creating the balance that you're talking about, identifying the capabilities that need to be developed both in the near term and long term. And nations modernize, nations develop on their own, and then they integrate it into the NATO process. That's probably enough for everybody on the NATO process. The one big difference is, since we now have these family of plans, we've been able to use the plans to be very specific about the identification of the requirements in our forces. And that has been extraordinarily helpful. And that, too, has sped up and made the process more efficient.
If I can,
Please.
I just want to add one thought on it. Of course, it is always good to think about what you can do on your own. And if you want to be able to overtake more responsibility and take a bigger piece of the burden sharing in Europe, then you have to think what you can do on your own, and also to develop sometimes weapon systems. But for example, if we think about transporting our army, we need a helicopter to transport it. And we lack the capability, the industrial capability to produce such a transport helicopter. So of course we in the Ministry of Defense, we had to decide for a different model, which is produced in the United States. And then of course you have to balance not only what is necessary from requirement-wise, but also what you need in time so that you have it. So time is key, and sometimes, of course, you have to procure from outer Europe. We always have to think about the industrial base and strengthen the industrial base, which we do through the different European instruments, which are very well and strongly supported by Germany. Of course, also we do it with ammunition. We do it with different weapon systems and different elements, so to say. But you have to think about time also as a key factor, and sometimes you have to procure what is, we call it out of the shelf, so what is there on the market so that we have the capabilities then quickly in our material armaments.
So timeliness, partners involved in that. Benjamin, do you want to come in on that?
I just wanted to react to your earlier question on the transatlantic dialogue. Because I hope that whoever gets elected in the White House, we can have on day one a very robust transatlantic conversation about burden sharing and priorities. What do we expect from each other? Where do Americans expect us to step up and take on more responsibility? I commend the Biden administration for its leadership in keeping transatlantic unity and supporting Ukraine over the last 2 years, but I regret a little bit that we didn't have enough of that conversation before. Over the previous administrations, we've heard concerns, once again, that are legitimate over defense spending in Europe and Europeans taking a bigger share of their own defense, sometimes in a very blunt way, sometimes in a more polite way, but we've seen continuity basically over the last 10 years over this. And it will be key for us to have a strategic transatlantic conversation about Europeans maybe taking more ownership in their own neighborhood, on their own security, as the United States maybe wants to focus on Asia. And I say this because, once again, when we think about the European pillar, Europeans supporting their defense industry, stepping up, it's critical that we also convey that's the best way to rethink and build the transatlantic relationship for the future. That's in the interest of both sides, both the United States and Europeans.
Do you want to? Yes, exactly.
Yeah, just to add and agrees that I think this strategic conversation among allies, it is ongoing and is extremely important. It is a transatlantic alliance. And that's why, of course, our transatlantic alliance allies play a crucial role. We must remember that we have also Canadians here as a framework nation leading the brigade, multinational brigade here in Latvia, and we're very grateful to our Canadian partners for this. So that's why, of course, the transatlantic linkage must be kept strong and efficient and alive in all the manifestations. Of course, we can say that U.S. is transatlantic link, and U.S. is indispensable for our security, for the leadership also in terms of supporting Ukraine. It's a both. It's a, of course, European pillar and transatlantic pillar, U.S. pillar. So we meet at Ramstein formats. It is led also by United States. So, and I think it's important that this leadership continues to be part of it. And I fully agree that the interest, it must be on both sides. It's the interest of European partners, but it also must be interest to our Canadian, American, UK, Turkish, etc., partners, because of course we all want to keep a strong alliance. Industrial base is crucial in this regard, and I think this debate will not be a simple one. It will be complicated, so because of course there is a national instinct to develop local industries. It's a good thing that we develop our local industries, military industries. We do it also in Latvia. At the same time, of course, how to make industrial pledge, what we made in Washington, efficient and inclusive for all of us, where also EU plays a role on this. EU has a role to play, especially in terms of innovation, technologies, military mobility, military industry. This is where EU also has a very important role to play, and also to strengthen transatlantic linkage.
So we're very much not only going in a Zeitenwende of strategy and going from crisis to defense of our daily lives, but also to an era not only of interoperability, but ever more interdependence, although finding the nuance might be hard. I want to go to you. This is very complicated, so are there some common sense questions that we need to pose to this illustrious panel? First question here, 2, 3, and then 4 if we have time. So let's maybe take 2 and then 2.
Thank you all very much for another very stimulating discussion. Just a point I'd like to offer to all of you. I'm going to be a little bit undiplomatic at this point. Tom Withington-Rusi. I totally agree about the burden sharing aspect, and it's good we're having this conversation. But I think we also need to push back a little bit here and say that the transatlantic relationship is a two-way street. Yep. In Europe, we have many capabilities that are indispensable to US security. We have ballistic missile early warning radars in northern England. We have the AXLOX 1 air defense system. We have basing. We have portage rights. We support US ballistic missile defense. Regardless of what happens in the White House in the 5th of November, I just wondered your thoughts. Do we need to be pushing back a little bit to say, hang on, there's a symbiosis that's going on here. This is not all a one-way street.
the need for pushback, question 1, and question 2, if you pass it on.
Thank you very much. My name is Irina Krasnoshtan. I'm from International Center for Ukrainian Victory. I will continue to be maybe a little bit undiplomatic. Bloomberg a few days ago published an article where they assess European readiness to defense and claim that basically European defense is Potemkin army without US support. What is your opinion on that? And the second part to this question is that Europe has at its borders Ukraine, very capable, very motivated army. All of your countries have been fascinated by the courage of Ukrainian military. So should it not be the time to change the lens through which you look at the Ukrainian armed forces and to look at them as a potential asset for you as the contributor to your own defense? And then if you change that lens, then it would perhaps change the way you take certain decisions vis-a-vis Ukraine, and you will then be interested to save as many Ukrainian servicemen and servicewomen as soon as possible to help us win, and then these people can contribute to your defense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have essentially 3 questions there: need for pushback, have we got this, and Ukrainian contribution. Do you want to start on this end and we'll go down?
Sure. Yeah. First, I'm a big fan of the Ukrainian Center for Victory, and I actually hosted them a couple of days ago, and there's a lot we can do to work together. First, I would like to underscore the fact that even though there's lots of reasons to be critical at European defense efforts, and we need to continue to step up, to continue to increase spending, to cooperate more and invest, if you look at the total support on both sides of the Atlantic, actually at this point Europeans have committed more, have spent more on both military and economic and humanitarian support for Ukraine. We should all do more collectively, and this is why what we've been discussing, the 50 billion euro loan on the frozen assets, the renewal of the European Peace Facility, continuing the bilateral commitments in terms of deliveries to Ukraine are important. But I think we can also be proud of what Europeans, alongside the United States, have done for Ukraine. On your second question, I completely agree. Ukrainians are defending Europe. They're defending our security and interest, in addition to defending their own sovereignty and freedom. And this is why I think the logical path for Ukraine will be to join the European Union and NATO. It's the only way to ensure long-term stability and security on the eastern flank of our continent. And this is also what Ukrainians have been dying for. I was on Maidan Square during the Revolution of Dignity in 2014. It's the first time in history that we've seen young people die for the European flag. At the time, by the way, 2014, where there was a lot of cynicism, a lot of people were very jaded in Europe about what the European Union was, we could see the source of inspiration it was for young people at our doorstep when it comes to the promise of a better future, democracy, and the fight against corruption. So it's also a way to revitalize, in a way, the European project. So I think that's really key. And one last point on Ukrainian defense, it's clear to us that there are so many opportunities for our defense industry and the Ukrainian defense industry to do more together, to innovate together, to produce together on the soils of European member states, and of course in Ukraine itself. And there's been progress in that direction, but I think we can do still a lot more in terms of that military cooperation.
And would you push back in a 2-second answer? Would you push back on the U.S.?
As I said, I mean, I think the best way to convince our American friends and partners of the use of the transatlantic relationship and the future of the transatlantic relationship is not to communicate that we're weak and helpless. On the contrary, is to show that we have a defense industry, we are taking responsibility in our own hands, that it brings value added to the United States. And already, as you said, I mean, we're both defending our interests. I think that's the case that especially was made during the Trump administration, and that needs to continue to be made.
And the Minister's Bruce? Yep.
Just a short reactions. I don't think so that we should push back. I think what we should do, we should remind our transatlantic partners that the global stability is the interest of all of us. And NATO is a guarantee for global stability. Efficient NATO is the guarantee, a solid rock on which we build the global stability. Of course, we also should demonstrate to our American, Canadian, other non-European partners that we are able to develop our armed forces, that we are not Potemkin, and I would disagree with that comparison. We are not Potemkin armies, but still more investment in our capabilities, not just in sustaining the army as such, but investing, modernizing. And again, I think we can see here success stories. Again, if you look, for instance, ammunition. Yes, sometimes we are critical of our industry. Ammunition, starting from 600,000 rounds in 2022. This year already it's more than 1 million rounds of 155 ammunition. Next year it goes even more up. So we develop industrial base. We show that actually we also can contribute. Technologies. I think Europe has a great potential. Of course, my favorite subject, everything which is connected to drones. We are co-leading with UK a drone coalition. So when I travel around Europe and I see such a strong potential, and already not potential, already the effective working of the, let us say, all technologies and drones, and we can go on and on in this. So that's why I think there is a mutual potential. Let's not waste the opportunity, and that's what we should remind our partners all around the alliance. We are all interested to keep alliance alive in all ways. Ukraine. I can go on as well here. So of course, Ukraine fights our war. Ukraine is showing the example how to fight. Ukraine is in many ways already is a mini NATO. So many systems. The case of interoperability takes place in Ukraine, on Ukrainian soil. Ukrainian army, Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian people are actually accumulating all the knowledge and coordinating, let us say, all those systems. And we can learn a lot. It's not just that we are supporting and providing Ukraine with support, but we should and we are learning a lot from Ukrainian side on how to develop new technologies, how to coordinate those all different kind of systems. So of course that's why, and not because that's why, also strategically Latvia supports Ukraine membership in NATO. We absolutely are sure that this would contribute also to security of the wider alliance.
Yes. Minister Braja, you wanted to jump in?
I think one point that Benjamin was referring to, and that we probably need to direct back more, and Steve can add to that, is the fact that US indeed is the biggest military assistance provider. The Baltics, Nordics are the second from the numbers, but the US funding actually goes back into the US, to their industry. And when we look at the states, there was a mapping of the states. To which states does it go? It goes to some of the facilities that would have otherwise ceased to exist. So there is a lot of sort of visibility argument for the benefit of US economies that we have to make from all this.
Thank you. Steve, you've been called out to contribute more to this piece by the minister.
This is really an area that I'm not an expert on in national and industrial capacity in the context of any context. No, I think that, the mandate that we, just to zoom out one more time, the mandate that the Washington Treaty establishes for us is being executed and fulfilled. The treaty says, protect the well-being of our people, safeguard freedom, democracy, the rule of law, unite in common defense to preserve peace. We did it for 40 years in the first era, the Cold War era. We did it differently over the last 30 in the era of kind of crisis management and strategic integration. And now we're in a new period, which requires new solutions and new arrangements and new initiatives, as the minister was describing. And yes, it's a challenge, and yes, it puts demands on our societies and our governments and our budgets. But that is where we are. And it's not our choice.
Thank you, Steve. Cynthia, for you on pushback Ukraine, and then back to Andres to wrap up.
I want to reiterate what has been said. So so well. And but maybe just to add one thought, we have to answer the question why it's in the interest of the United States to have NATO and to have European defense and to have to guarantee European security. If you have a look on the trade record between the European Union and the United States, then you see that we are their biggest market. So of course it's in their national interest that Europe still exists so that they can have economic growth and that they can have trade. So this is a clear national interest for the United States to guarantee and to stand up also for European security. So this is something maybe we have to elaborate on and speak out louder. So we are their market, and if they want to have a trade with democracies, then they also have an interest to stand up for European security. But of course, we also have to come from a position of strength and to show them we are able and willing to take over more responsibility and we invest in our own security. This having said, and the rest has been very well said. So.
Thank you.